This is Art in the Raw. I'm your host, Ann Kelly. Today's guest is Tim Church. Tim is an accomplished artist, medical doctor, chemist, machinist, and martial artist, among other things we may not even know about. Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Thanks. Wow, you did some homework.
That I did. Where are you today?
I am in Richardson, Texas, which is basically Dallas, Texas. It's just a suburb of DFW.
And you're from California originally, aren't you?
You know, it's weird. Yes, but at this point, I spent so much time outside of California. You know, I went California, New Orleans, Denver, New Orleans, Dallas, Baton Rouge, Dallas.
Okay, wow. I didn't know you lived in Denver. I'm a Colorado native, been here in New Mexico for 20 years, but spent a good deal of time in Denver.
Hopefully we'll do this interview sometime in the future, and I'll be able to say Santa Fe.
Yes.
Because that's one of my end goals.
And yeah, because you were here recently, and it spoke to you. You enjoyed it.
You know what's weird? And people probably aren't going to get this at any level, but Santa Fe really reminds me of New Orleans without the alcohol.
Sure, we're not quite as tolerant with the walking down the street with roadies here in Santa Fe.
You know, it's got the same art scene. It's kind of got the same food scene. It has a very eclectic vibe, and it's a very accepting scene. You know, like you could just kind of tell the vibe towards others. It just really reminded me of parts of New Orleans, again, without excessive amounts of alcohol.
Yeah, no, I got the opportunity to visit New Orleans for the first time, I think about 2 years ago, and I felt a little bit at home there. I think just also the history. I mean, both places have so much history to them that I'd never been there before, but it kind of had a Santa Fe feel to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other than I was a little confused because every restaurant I went was trying to send me off with a cocktail into the street.
Yeah, to go cup.
is definitely illegal here in Santa Fe.
It's illegal everywhere. And you live there a little while and you go into a restaurant and you walk out expecting to get a to-go cup. They look at you like you're from Mars.
Exactly. And you work in the medium of copper, but in a really, really unique way. And as I understand it, it was living in New Orleans that kind of partially inspired that. Am I right?
Yeah, you know, it's the weirdest thing. Like, I've always appreciated art. I've always loved art. I had no formal training in it at all. But I just loved it. I loved galleries. I just loved anything from costumes to beautiful food dishes to art on the wall. I always appreciated art. And I was in New Orleans walking down Royal Street, and I saw these big gaudy copper fountains, and I'm like, that's ridiculous, I can make that. And I went home and I started making these huge silly copper fountains. I mean, they were copper and wine bottles and things that spun, and then of course I started to like, okay, well, there's too much copper, I need to change the color. So I started playing with flame. And then it was, okay, well, that's not enough. I want even more color. So I started playing with chemicals. And then one thing led to another. And next thing you know, I was making wall pieces and kind of completely moved away from the fountains.
How long were you making the fountains for?
You know, that's a good question. Probably a year and a half. But I was pretty productive. So I ended up with like 40 fountains in my garage. I didn't really have, anything I could do with them. I didn't have an outlet to sell them or anything, so I kept making them, and I'm like giving them away to friends. And
Sure.
So yeah, eventually, I got rid of my fountains, but it was great because I grew up on a farm. I didn't grow up on a farm. I worked on a farm, real farms, like agribusiness in California. And the farm I worked on, it's called actually a ranch. And then when I worked in the sheds, basically the lettuce sheds, like you do everything. No one does it for you. Like you do all your own welding, you cut all your own metal, you figure out how to cut metal, you don't cut a finger off. And so when I was doing the copper fountains, it brought all that back. You know, I was cutting copper again or cutting metal again and soldering and figuring out ways to connect things. So it really kind of connected to all those skills that I had kind of developed when I was much, much younger.
Then you moved from the fountains to wall pieces.
Really wasn't my intention, as I was creating colors on copper with chemicals, with flame. I would weave the copper. You know, I would make practice ones, and I'd put them on the wall. And my friends would be like, "Oh, that's beautiful." And I'm like, "Huh? There's no electricity. There's no water. I like this a lot more."
Sure.
And so I started making wall pieces, and you know, it really was more than anything a giant experiment at first. You know, it was this all these permutations of salt and chemicals and heat, and how long do I let it sit, and then on top of that, how do I lock the colors in? You know, so you're mixing with lacquers and epoxies and spray enamels, and you know, all these different combinations, and trying to figure out what does and does not work.
I had read somewhere you'd said most people who are experimenting with copper really are only getting into maybe 3% of what's possible. You've kind of pushed the boundary of these mediums with your other backgrounds.
Yeah, not to be gross, but if I see one more exhibition that says copper and piss in the same sentence, I'm like, seriously? That's like the silliest, most overplayed, stupid thing I've ever seen. And yes, too many people just like pour a chemical on there, like, woohoo, done.
Right.
And you know, that's really just the beginning of the process is the chemicals you put on there. What really matters is temperature, outside temperature. I do everything outside. So everything is 100% dependent on the weather. So in the winter, you're only getting blues and browns from me. In the summer, you're only getting oranges and reds from me. In the fall, you get a combination. So like that's a classic kind of fall piece. It's orangey, but it's not ready. So like when it's 108 degrees here, everything turns red. When it's in the hundreds, everything's orange. In the winter, everything's blue when it's really cold. So it's all about controlling the chemical reactions, which involves, of course, the temperature outside and then the oxygen going in and out. So, but let me tell you, it was a painful process. I mean, I have thrown away so much art. And you know, fortunately with copper, I can grind it down if it doesn't work. But it has been a very, very iterative process. I'll put it that way.
Well, but it also seems to be kind of born out of curiosity and creativity. You wanted to know what would happen. You know, you said you'd been working with metal kind of in some format your entire life. Kind of earlier on, it seems to me that there was maybe a lot of experimenting. See, now you know if you're working in one season, kind of what you're going to get. So it sounds to me like a lot more control over it, but I'm sure there's room for a lot of happy accidents. Even so.
You really nailed it. It's pretty funny you say that because I kind of thought I was stuck with the palette I've got in terms of colors. And then about a month ago, my girlfriend says, who was a chemist back in college, and she says, well, how do they get purple in fireworks? And I said, I don't know. And she looks up the chemical. Well, you can buy the chemical on Amazon. So guess what? I got purple in my pieces now. You know, I would have never, it wasn't on my palette before. And so every time something like that happens, there's like 1,000 new trap doors you can go down. And then the other thing I started doing was motion. You know, I used to put the chemicals on. I'd keep it flat, put the chemicals on it. Now I got a spinning table. So I drip the chemicals on while it's spinning. Sometimes I tilt the piece so that they all run like lava So, it's to me, the biggest challenge isn't the creativity. It's having enough time to flesh out every idea.
Oh yeah.
Like the motion stuff I was doing this summer, and I got sidetracked by the fireworks stuff. So now I got to go back to the motion stuff here in a little bit. So
I love that. So yeah, time management, it's definitely a factor, right?
yeah.
I'm going to pull up your website and look at some of the new pieces, give people an idea of what we're
Yeah, and one of the
about.
challenges about my pieces is they just don't photo well.
You coat them with.
Yeah, I have to coat them in epoxy to stop the oxidation. And
Oh.
so it really, in real life, they're thick, they're more alive. I'm fortunate, that one of the gentlemen that helps me monitored, who's actually a professional photographer, he goes to great pains to take good pictures of my stuff. But they still, every time someone sees one live, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea."
Sure. No, I mean, that's always a challenge. And particularly as the digital format of sharing artwork has become even more important. And I have had the opportunity to see these in person. So I mean, I always say viewing online, it's the next best thing. It's always nicer to be able to go to the place and see the actual artwork. But I feel like they've done a pretty good job there photographing that, especially not to get any reflection, because with your surface, that can definitely be quite challenging.
So you got right to the point there. The reflections, it's so tough. Hence why the professional photographer has to do it.
Yes, you got to collaborate sometimes.
Yeah.
And going back a step, my background is in photography, so I'm kind of fascinated by, you'd mentioned a moment ago that whatever you're coating them with is actually fixing the piece. So that brings me back to photography, whereas if you make a photograph and you don't fix it, it's just going to keep changing indefinitely, which actually makes me wonder what actually does happen if you don't do that. Do they?
These will all go to black.
Okay. How long do you think something like that would take?
Oh, I had it here. I moved it out. So the first piece I ever did went to black, and I actually still have it. It was in here. So that's one of the things that kind of messes with your brain when you make these things. Mm-hmm. You're like, it's really good. I really like it. But if I let it keep going, will it get richer? Because it doesn't just go to black. It first gets richer as the colors start kind of melding into each other. So it's tough. Sometimes you're like, okay, it's perfect. But other times you let it go. Like this is one I let go. You can tell how it starts to kind of merge into each other. And you can also see some dark spots down below where that's the beginning of the black. So when you start to see those patches, they're almost like tiger stripes sometimes. That's it. It's time to go. You got to get epoxy on it or else it's going to keep going. But you can see how this thing at one point was really crisp. I don't always like the crispness. I like it better when the lines start to blur like this. So this is one I let go pretty far before I epoxied it.
For really any art making, it's where do you stop?
Yep. That's one of the things that's really changed over time for me, is having the confidence to let it go.
Yes.
I used to really quickly be like, oh my gosh, it can't get any better, and stop it. And then kind of over time, I learned, no. Like this one, you can see again around the moon there. That's an example of letting it go and kind of letting the chemicals fight and letting kind of be, like a dominance established between the different chemicals. Whereas if I had stopped this early, you wouldn't have got any of that. It's funny because you can't necessarily see it when it's happening, but you can see it once it's epoxied. It happens, it actually kind of blurs, and then when you epoxy it, all the layers come out. So again, it's just having done it so many times, I can kind of guess what it's going to look like after I put the epoxy on it.
So it's a pretty slow process of the transformation.
In the winter it is. In the winter it's days. In the summer it's hours.
So there's a husband-wife team of photographers that are located out of Arizona that work in salt prints, which is one of the earlier processes, only work during the summer, actually, because
Really?
typically with salt prints, it's a really tricky printing process, whereas unless you're really, really good at it, so it's a hand applied emulsion process. You mix up your own chemistry, you coat the paper, taking it way back. And unless you're really good at it, or even if you are really good at it, sometimes you just get a very low contrast, almost kind of tan and white image. But they somehow modified the process just a little bit. And the fact that they're doing it in Arizona during the summer, they get these rich colors, which is unheard of. So it's kind of, it makes sense, but it's interesting to hear that copper is kind of behaving the same way.
Yeah, I love that story. I've never heard of such a thing. And yeah, that's very, very, very similar.
Yeah, I'll send you information about them later. I think you just enjoy checking that out. And so you said when you started making the fountains, at that time you didn't have any gallery representation. You were just making them because you love to make them, and that was the whole motivation. But you do have gallery representation now. How did you get there? That's always a kind of a mysterious process for a lot of artists.
Yeah, man, I could write a book like I think every artist could. Get abused a few times. You end up trading out art for money they owe you a few times. So my path's also kind of weird because there's a gentleman named Aaron Young who's a wildly successful artist, international artist, who I went to high school with. So when I took up art, Aaron's in Manhattan, and at the time was represented maybe by Gagosian, I don't know, one of those people. Exactly. And it was interesting because it's like having Tiger Woods teach you how to putt. Mm-hmm. He was nice to me. He giggled at my stuff, but he saved me a lot of pain and suffering with some very good insight about dealing with galleries and people paying money for your art. Initially, it was one of those deals where you rent space in a place. And they were very, very nice to me. I rent space in there and I sold some art in there. But there was a big, every town's got them, one of those white light nights. They said, hey, you need to go out here. We got a space for you. And it was really a sentinel event for me because I took like 17 pieces and sold every piece.
Wow, that's huge.
And I was like, maybe I've got something here. Yeah. And so then I went to New Orleans and went into gallery after gallery after gallery after gallery after gallery. And not only rejected me, they typically rejected me pretty rudely. It's just a fairy tale story. I literally was about to give up. And I go into this last gallery, actually, ironically, the gallery that had the copper fountains where I started doing this years before. And it ends up that, strangely enough, the wife and co-owner was from my hometown, Salinas, California.
Love that.
And I think she did it to humor me. And she says, well, we'll put them out in the courtyard. And then I brought them in and she says, oh no, those are going in the gallery. Mm-hmm. And they did well almost right off the bat. And then I had couple other galleries that didn't work out so well. I was in Santa Fe for an art thing. I walked into Wyford, saw what they had going on, walked away, eating lunch. I'm like, man, life's too short. I walked back in there, showed them my phone, said, this is what I'm doing. They just said, we love it. Can you get us some pieces? I said, I got 3 in my car. Handed them 3 pieces, no contract, nothing. They sold the 3 pieces like in 2 weeks. That was 4 years ago, and they've been amazing to work with ever since.
And that is not always a thing that works. So
no,
bravo.
No,
yeah.
It doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a pretty bold person, and I had been beaten up so much. Even that last ask was a pretty painful ask. Because you live in it. I mean, they're not kind when they reject you, and I get it. They've got their group. They don't want to grow one more. But, it's so about how they represent you.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much great art out there. If they don't buy into you and your process, it doesn't matter how many galleries have your stuff in it. They're not going to sell a piece.
No, it's not good for anybody. It's a
No.
relationship like any other type of relationship. So while maybe some galleries might be willing to consign some work, if they're not going to represent your work in the way, just if you just kind of don't vibe together, or it's just not a good fit, having, you know, your work in the back of a gallery getting dusty isn't doing anybody
You know,
any good.
and Tim Wyford at Wyford Galleries and the different salespeople, like the tough love was amazing, especially in the beginning. They told me a few things that are just, I mean, it might have been hard to hear, but looking back at it, I'm like, man, I really needed to hear that.
Sure.
And a lot of it was just about tightening up the process, tightening up the work. You know, if, you know, just simple stuff. Like I was so concerned about the front, I didn't pay attention to the back. And they're like, no, both sides represent you. You know, when somebody takes the picture off the wall and they see the back and it's a mess, then they're going to think you're a mess. And so it was putting some time and energy into the whole package. That really, really helped me kind of figure out the gig. And now, you know, now that you get it, it's kind of obvious, but at the time it's not obvious.
Well, right. And then you being receptive to that, because sometimes I have those conversations with people and they just, they don't want to hear it. I mean, not that the gallerist is always right, but they probably have, you know, some insight or understanding of their client base. And of course, I have people walk in all the time that want to show me work, try to be nice about it. Sometimes it's just not a good fit. You just happen to walk into the right gallery at the right time.
Oh,
That, and they're pretty, I mean, they don't have a huge stable of artists there, really.
Oh, it was all timing.
They know what they like, and that is what they do. And,
well, it was timing too, because they just lost a copper artist,
mm,
so they were open to that idea. It's all timing. I mean, I see these other people I've talked to. They're like, no, we're too full right now. If we talked to you 6 months ago, it would have worked. But it's all timing.
sure. I mean, a lot of times, maybe for example, we're having a show of somebody that does storm photography, and then I'll have 10 to 50 other people email me and say, I also do storm photography. And that's something to understand of, okay, I'm probably going to enjoy looking at your pictures, but we're not trying to bring in 50 people who make storm photographs, because, you know, that's actually kind of disrespectful to the one person we represent that does that. I think it's kind of those little details of galleries that I went to art school myself, and it wasn't really until I was working in a gallery that I had the understanding that I do of that. So it's a mysterious thing for a lot of people.
Well, art's humbling. I mean, you know, I'm very blessed in it. I found it at a time when the internet existed.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, I can sit here and look at thousands of pieces of art a night, and I did. I mean, thousands. And there's some funny stories behind that. I thought I found Jackson Pollock. No one had ever heard of him. Realized, evidently, he's pretty famous.
A few people have heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah, no. At the time, I thought I was the first to find him. But when you do that, you realize there are so many talented people out there. I mean, it's an endless amount of talent. And so I think you do have to get lucky to kind of find the right avenue at the right time, who are willing to get behind you. That's the humbling part of it to me, is, man, the stars got to align for you. It's such a blessing for me to find this at this point in my life, because I'm never going to stop making art. I mean, even if I got to give it away, I'm never going to stop doing this. I mean, It's just my passion. My doctoring life, it's pretty intense. My life is pretty intense. So to come do this, where there's no expectations, is something I do for me. And, you know, I create things that make people, provoke emotions in people. And I do it because I truly enjoy doing it. I'm never going to stop doing it. I mean, all I think about is like, okay, the next house I buy, how big is my art room going to be? Because right now my dining room is my art room, my study is my art room, my garage is my art room, and I have a shed that's my art room. So, you know, it's this is how I'm going to spend my life, hopefully at Santa Fe at some point. But yeah, I to say I have a passion for it is about as accurate as it gets.
So you probably haven't been in Santa Fe long enough to experiment with any actual making of any pieces here, have you?
No, I can't wait.
It takes a little while. I mean, you're not just tossing some chemistry on there. It's acids and bases, and you're letting them compete. And then there's elements. And so, I mean, you would have to actually live here to actually make a piece in Santa Fe. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and you know, that's a great point and lead. I was going to mention this. Making stuff in Dallas is very different than making stuff in Southern Louisiana. The humidity in the air really impacted all the chemical reactions. So when I moved here, I kind of had to change some things, and some colors I lost. And then here, because we have the extreme temperature swings both in winter and summer, that's a plus. But then also when the humidity occasionally kicks in here, it reminds me, oh, this is what it was like when I was in Southern Louisiana. I've often thought about actually having a studio there because of the humidity creates such crazy colors. It might be worth having a studio there. So yeah, so Santa Fe, altitude, dry air, I would love the challenge of it.
You're just going to have to travel all around the country and experiment and see what happens where, and then.
So thanks again to my girlfriend who came up with this genius idea. So we were in Moab, and she looked at the dirt and she said, you know, there's a bunch of iron in that dirt. And I'm like, it's just dirt. She says, no, it's dirt full of iron. So she said, take some home and mix it up with the chemicals and see what it does on the copper. Genius, bright blue color I've never seen before. So I'm thinking every place I go, I want to bring some dirt back.
There you go. So, I mean, that's a good idea to kind of do what I'm talking about, but not actually live in those places for weeks or months.
Yeah.
You've just got to collect your samples and bring them back.
I like it.
Yeah, no. I'm happy to send you some dirt.
Now
If
I'm
you
coming
would
back
like.
to Santa Fe soon.
Or just come back and visit. Maybe get some of that dirt from that church in Chimayo with the holy dirt.
Oh, I like
Who
that.
knows? Who knows what that does? Yeah. So you can drive back, but if you need some dirt, let me know.
Oh, wow.
I'll help you out there. So in terms of working with copper, just generally in art, I mean, they found copper in the oldest civilizations back to 9,000 BCE in the Middle East. Something I was reading about last night. So, I mean, copper, it's everywhere. People have experimented with all of it, you know, with it in all of these different ways. You see it often in printmaking. When I was in art school, I did a liberal arts degree, so we got to play with all of the different mediums. So that's an interesting process in that it's reductive, where you've coated a copper plate and then you've etched away the parts that you want the acid to etch, and you throw it in the bath, and then you make prints from that. Kind of the way you're working is similar, but it's not. I mean, I don't know how far it's etching into the plate. It doesn't etch away in the same way. It's etching away in a different way. Am I right? Am I wrong?
Again, very insightful. So it can be everything from full-blown etching, where you can scrape everything off and the colors in the copper, to like the Moab dirt, where it's almost like paint. It's sitting on top of the copper, but there was a chemical reaction that changed the color, to stuff in between. So depending on the particular process I'm doing, sometimes it's like a patina on steroids. Sometimes not. Sometimes it's a cake that films on top of that develops on top of the copper. When that happens, you got to be really careful, because you can scrape it off really easily. So again, you know, that goes into account as you make your piece, and how you're going to handle it. Because when it's sitting on top, it's beautiful, but it's really tricky to epoxy. And it's kind of taken me a while to figure that out without the whole thing like sliding off the edge of the copper. But yeah, that's very insightful. Sometimes it's basically like an etching. Sometimes it's basically like you're forming crystals on top of the copper, and then you're going to lock those in.
But I guess we would never actually see the etched aspects of it because you're essentially varnishing it in the end. So that would be filling, or maybe it's just subtle enough that
you can, if you look at the pieces, you can kind of see it, because one will be super smooth and the other will almost look like it has, I mean, it's almost 3D.
I'm gonna have to, I mean, I've been over to Wyford and looked at the actual pieces, but next time I go in, I'll have to
Yeah, you'll pick it out fast.
Close, and I'll look at it from that angle, how only people in the arts or makers do, where you're looking at the back. And
I know, it's so funny. I go tap on people's epoxy. I look for air bubbles. And
you go to museums and you're like, oh, what's going on with that that epoxy?
And I look at their colors. I'm like, okay, are those store-bought or did they make them?
Exactly.
I can pretty much tell you which catalog they picked them out of if they're store-bought.
Right. And yours do not come from a catalog.
No. And that's, that's one of the good and bad things about my pieces is that there's only one for each piece. There's never going to be another. Never, ever, ever, ever. They can't. People see a piece and are like, oh, I love that. Is it available? No, it's gone. I can make something vaguely in that direction. If you really like that piece, you better get it, because there's never going to be another one.
Exactly. You could do something inspired by it, but
yeah.
Maybe you have a kind of recipe for purple now, but it's going to be a different purple every time.
No, yeah. And it's going to be interacting differently with what's next to it. Because, the day I make it, the humidity was different, or the temperature was different, or whatever.
So you mentioned Jackson Pollock. Is he an influence? Do you have other influences?
This sounds so
wide range,
predictable and stereotypical.
It's okay.
I like Jackson Pollock because I like the magnitude of it. I love the huge pieces. And I think a lot of people don't get that. They're like, no, it wasn't what he did. It was the scale he did it. And I know this is super obvious and predictable. The other person I really gravitated to immediately was Rothko. And again, I thought I invented him too. I'm looking at his pieces. I'm like, I want that piece. And I looked it up, like, it's 2.5 million. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I guess people know who he is. Yeah. And at first I didn't get it. At first I was like, this is silly. It's colors. And then the more and more of his work I looked at, I'm like, this is genius. It's colors that evoke an emotion. And some of his stuff is just, okay, you can see where he didn't quite get it. And other stuff, I'm like, wow, he got it. But man, I look at everything. I look at sculptures. I've been looking at a lot of photography recently. I just like to be inspired. I tell people I can look at a carnival ride and be like, oh, I love the pattern. Take a picture. I'm going to go put that on a piece of art. I just love looking at art. I don't care what the format is or the genre is. I mean, I buy the craziest street art for like $1, when I'm something sketchy, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. Can I buy that? Like $5. Okay, perfect. It's sitting in that rack in there. So yeah.
Inspires you. I mean, that's all that matters.
Yeah, I get inspirations from everywhere.
And that's what it's all about. So you collect a bit of art yourself?
I love to support random street artists. That's my thing. I mean, and not necessarily like the $25 ones. I'll buy really expensive pieces from these guys if I like it. Especially New Orleans, when they have a New Orleans flair to them. So yeah, I definitely like to collect. I definitely like to kind of support people that are up and coming. And it's awesome to see them 5 years later own the gallery, Right. I'm like, I should have bought 10 of their pieces.
But if you got the one, or even if you just talk to them long enough to inspire that person to keep doing what they're doing, I feel like that's
I mean, if I had 10 of their pieces, I would never sell them anyway, but
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's collecting artists because they're well known, or collecting artists just because you authentically love the work, which is
Yeah, I like stuff that speaks to me. I mean, if it doesn't really speak to me, like really evoke an emotion, I'm just not interested. And care who it is or how famous it is. It's got to speak to me.
correct.
It's got to be something doing something that you can feel like they're not going through the motions. They've asked a little bit more of their piece in themselves. That's the stuff that speaks to me.
Definitely. So, a question I have been into asking all the guests on the show is if there's anything else interesting that they collect. Not that art is an obvious thing, but I found a lot of creative people have interesting collections that maybe they hadn't even thought about.
I already kind of alluded to this. Like, don't ever go to Home Depot, IKEA, or any junk store with me, because I will walk out of there with the strangest arrangement of things. And because I think they could somehow work into one of my pieces. And then after they fail 90% of the time, I give them the goodwill. So Goodwill must think I'm loony, the big boxes of brand new stuff I bring them. Because it just didn't, I'll see a bath mat with a weird pattern. I'll see like a wrench that's like this, and I'll definitely collect things which may potentially end up in my art.
Right. I bet when you show up at Goodwill, they're excited. They're like,
Yeah. Well, it's
hey,
all
that's
brand
the
new.
guy with I bet they're like, oh, this is going to be interesting. What's in there now?
No, and it's all brand new. It's just I tried it. It didn't work for art, so I'm like, oh, that's perfectly good. I don't need it. Here we go. Goodwill.
Sure. I love that.
It's funny because that's also such a fun creative process. Because you'll come across something, you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the bomb. And then you use it, and you're like, eh. And then there'll be something else, you're like, I really shouldn't get it. You get it, and you use it, you're like, oh wow, this is like a game changer. This is the coolest thing ever. I didn't ever think this was going to work. I think that's part of the treasure hunting journey part of it,
Maybe that would be a good exercise. Next time you go to Home Depot, pick out the thing that you think is going to be the most useless and get that and just see what happens.
The problem with Home Depot at this point, I own one of everything in the store. So yeah, I need to expand my horizons.
Maybe you're going to start collecting dirt.
Yeah, no, that was a big win for sure.
So if you could travel anywhere right now, perhaps internationally, somewhere you couldn't drive to that you can't get to, where would that be?
Boy, that's a phenomenal question. Probably Polynesia, Fiji, or something like that. Just something way out there, way extreme. Hang out, surf, eat fish.
Oh yeah.
Or just go experience other cultures, in particular anything in Asia. I've never been to Asia. I really, really, really want to go hit up some cities in Japan.
I've always wanted to go there to snowboard. high on my radar.
That's so wild there, the way it's so low altitude, but it looks really fun.
It's amazing. I'm gonna make that happen. And then in terms of places you have been able to go that you've been in your lifetime, do you have a favorite?
So outside of the US, it's stereotypical Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
Costa Rica spoke to me. The people spoke to me. The kindness spoke to me. The way of life spoke to me. But in terms of like cultural enrichment, Portugal blew me away. Mm-hmm. I'd heard about it, and I've been to the Parises and the Londons and all the other big places, and there just was something about Portugal that I found how old it was. Like really old.
Right. We're talking about New Orleans and Santa Fe.
So. Yeah, we're talking like 400 BC old. Mm-hmm. And the people and there's a lot of inspiring elements to it. And I'll go back there in a second.
Did you check out Porto while you were there? I've been told Porto is kind of like the Santa Fe of Portugal. Santa Fe. What was it about Santa Fe that's calling you?
I cannot live someplace that doesn't have spectacular food. I'm just a total food snob.
Yes.
New Orleans wrecked me. I'm a food snob. So there's that. People are important to me. I love the eclectic nature of the people. I just, that to me is important. And of course the art scene. I mean, it just seems to me like you could never run out of galleries to go to. And never lack for inspiration there. And so, I don't know, there's just a certain places you go, and I would love to be able to quantify this, where you can just feel it in the air. Like you can just physically feel it in the air. I love Manhattan. A lot of people don't. I love it. I love you can feel the chaos in the air. New Orleans, of course, it's the humidity, but the second you get off the plane, you can feel it in the air. Santa Fe is one of those places to me that, like, when you get out of the car, you're like, oh, I'm back, you know, and it's who knows. I think there's something to it. There's definitely a vibe to different cities, good and bad. And Santa Fe is one of those places I'm just like, oh, it feels good here.
Did you bring any green chili home?
We did.
Good.
Yes, we did. We did all kinds of stuff.
That's one. I mean, I love all of the seasons in Santa Fe, but that's one of my favorite parts of fall is just driving around, and you can smell all the green chili roasters everywhere, and you can bring a whole bag home with you. And if you live here, you have little bags in your freezer, and then you have it all year.
Those are the things that make places great. I mean, it really is. It's this thing that's always there. It's always predictable. It's unique to there. But that's what makes some places great. I don't call them traditions, but it just grounds you, them and their culture and their life. And after you've lived through a couple cycles of that, it becomes part of who you are.
Yeah, I gotta admit, like in terms of Santa Fe, the green chili is one of the reasons I officially cannot leave. Or I did leave, I would need chili. And
you can buy it on Amazon these days.
There's some restaurants in Santa Fe that will ship to you. So if you run out,
we may have done that.
If you run out and they go dry, let me know. A few weeks ago, I had a friend on the show who is an attorney and musician. Some people had kind of said, oh, that's like an interesting combination of things. She was saying, no, I think there's actually a lot of people who are attorneys that are also musicians, because you kind of need that balance. And you work in the medical industry. So is it a little bit like that for you as well?
It's a difficult balance. So there's like the business side of it, because in the beginning, I'm like, am I an artist, or I'm a doctor, or am I a doctor artist?
Right.
And my friend Aaron, the professional artist, said, no, Tim, you're not a doctor. You're an artist. Be an artist. Don't confuse the two. It's too gimmicky. Be an artist. And that really resonated with me. It kind of empowered me too. I have very little crossover in my life. It's pretty fascinating. Like my friends at work that I know well, they'll know I'm an artist. They've probably never been to my website. And I do that fairly intentionally. Art's mine. It's me. I spend so much of the rest of my life doing things for others, and I love it. I'm a blessed human being with a blessed life. But art's mine. Yes. You know, and I don't want other people's expectations on it. I don't want to be trying to make other people, meet their expectations per se. I don't want to meet my expectations. I like to look at a piece and I'm like, yeah, that's the emotion I wanted. And sometimes, frankly, I make a piece, my friend says, I hate it. I'm like, good, because I would expect you to hate it. It wasn't meant for you, and it's just because I know what they like and I know what I wanted to make. So it is a weird balance, but I think it's a healthy balance for me. But I've always been that way from the beginning. I was always like, I'm always doing this for me. The second I start, Because in the beginning, when you start doing this, you're like, oh, people love fleur-de-lis. I want to make fleur-de-lis. Oh, copper flowers. I want to make a bunch of copper flowers and coloring them. And it was very artificial. I mean, it's fun, but it was artificial. It was kind of, I reached a point where I'm like, no, if it doesn't really challenge me and really kind of evoke an emotion, then I don't want to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, or how long are you going to keep doing it? Maybe you make a few and then you're done.
No, how many fleur-de-lis can you make? And it was, yeah, it wasn't rewarding.
Sure. So, I mean, I think there's just kind of that within making. And then I think there's also that difference between being an artist that puts himself out there and shows the work, being kind of a closet artist where you come home and you make the work and shove it under the bed and never show it to anybody. So there's that, and just kind of the where you're driven to take it. Do you want to share it with people? I know a lot of talented artists and musicians that don't share it, and I think that's an interesting thing.
It is, and you can jump into the psyche of that, for sure. Man, I can't share enough of it. To me, that's the best part of it. Sharing in the process, sharing in the art, listening to what people see in it. That's fascinating to me. And I've had to learn to like be quiet and listen, because often what they say is very different than what I saw, but it's cool. It's part of the journey. To me, it's why I have a website that every piece on there is sold, but I love sharing it. So, and I think you'll get this, particularly for people who appreciate it. There's some people who are like, they really, really appreciate it, and it's fun to share with them. So that's, to me, is the best part of it, is the sharing of it. I keep almost nothing. Mm-hmm. I learned early on not to fall in love with your pieces, and
that can be a challenging thing where they become like babies or something, or you just get connected or attached to the piece.
I struggled with that in the beginning. 100% struggled with that. And then eventually I learned, no, you're going to end up with 200 babies in your house. Right. And that's not going to go well. It's like 200 puppies.
You're going to have to buy another house or a few more houses to display all of them.
And there's an element too, if you've got the old stuff around, it's not inspiring you to create new creative stuff. Mm-hmm. I think if you got the old stuff around, you tend to kind of gravitate towards doing that style again. You don't have it around, because I love that. I keep pictures there. I've kept pictures from the beginning, and I love to go look at my old stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot I went down that path, and boy, I'm glad I left it.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was pretty satisfying. Anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a few photographers you may not know that I think you'd enjoy. So later on, I'm going to email you links to them. I think they would inspire you.
I would love that.
And then I have to ask, I mean, you've done so many interesting things, and it seems like you're kind of all in. Martial arts, is that still something you participate in?
Oh, no. I was in Portugal to compete in the European Championships. That was in January, pre-COVID. So yeah, I fight.
That's recent. That's huge.
Yeah, no, I'm a competitive jiu-jitsu person. I fight on an international level. I've won the world championship the last 2 years. I haven't been on the mat for 5 months because of COVID. I love it. It's another part of creating balance in your life. And again, none of them know I'm an artist. So most of them don't know I'm a doctor. For me, again, you could probably figure it out. I'm pretty high strung. I have to work hard to have balance. So I got my family, I got my work, I got my art, and I got my jiu-jitsu. And that's kind of my life. I don't really watch TV. I don't really read, because I'm either doing stuff with my kids or making art.
And your kids, or one of them?
Yeah, they are. They're both in high school. And, the main reason this is, again, I'll show you. This is one of my art rooms. You can see a piece right there on the tabletop.
Oh, cool.
That one's cooking right there. So the main reason I do this at home is to share it with my family. if I had a studio elsewhere, so like my daughter, some of the pieces they need some things sprinkled on. Like rocks
Sorry, dogs. These are my
nah.
children.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's all part of the family thing.
Yes, this is my family. You were talking about your family. I wanted to introduce mine. And I think there's a bird. There's a bird that, go on. Okay, sorry. I think we've got them under control. What you were saying.
Well, they're very much part of it, especially my daughter. So, when I was talking about like watching pieces and knowing when to epoxy them, I'll call her and say, hey, can you come downstairs and look at this one? And I'll be like, is it ready yet? And she'll be like, no, or yes. Or then other pieces, I'll be like, hey, does this need some rocks in there? Does this need some gold flake? And she'll be like, no, or if it does, just a little bit. So like, she's my official gold flaker. If you ever see my pieces that have some gold flakes in there, look like stars, she does all my gold flaking. So having it at home makes it part of the process. But it's also important to me for them to see me engage in creative stuff. If I had a warehouse a mile away and I disappeared with my warehouse and made art, and I never saw any of it, I think there's a valuable life lesson missed there. It's important for me to do that stuff at home. Hence why this is technically my office, and then I don't have a dining room.
Well, the Artintheraw studio is kind of taking over my backyard right now.
That's perfect.
Yeah, so I'm filming outside as long as I can until it gets cold. I'd kind of joked with some other snow enthusiast friends that I might be out here during the winter when it's snowing with a jacket and hat on. I think I'll at least have to record one episode while doing that. We'll see, but but I might have to take over one of the rooms in the house when it gets a bit colder.
I think the snow would be awesome.
I'm kind of obsessed with snowboarding, and if I can be out on the mountain in sub-zero temperatures, I'll just have to get I don't know. I'll make it work. So you said you didn't really watch a lot of TV, but I am curious if you have a favorite movie.
Because I used to have to, I used to travel a lot. So when I traveled, I'd watch movies on the plane. Mm-hmm. And probably not surprised. I like movies that challenge your mind in terms of art and philosophy. And you're going to think I'm a total freako. I like things like Apocalypse Now and the movie Seven with Brad Pitt, and then Fight Club. That's 2 of the 3 are Brad Pitt movies. That's interesting. Things like that just they have to have a good soundtrack. Mm-hmm. They have to be visually stimulating. I mean, think about like Apocalypse Now. I mean, the photography is unbelievable. They have to make you think. This is not a great quality in me, but I'm better at it now, but I used to not like mindless movies. I wasn't interested in turning my mind off. I wanted to be. Sure. Now I'm more interested in turning my mind off. Now I'll watch a silly comedy and enjoy it. But yeah.
You stay pretty busy, so I could see going, okay, I don't really have time for something like that, but.
Not so much time. It's like, what do you want out of it?
Sure.
And I guess.
Making a piece or.
Yeah. Something to challenge your thinking on things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But there's a time and a place for that. Okay, maybe you just want a really
no, for sure.
You want to zone out a little bit. That's balance.
And I've worked really hard on that. So yes, I come to appreciate such things.
And how about music? Do you have a favorite band or style of music or everything?
No, I listen to really loud, really violent, really people always freak out when they hear my music. I listen to Nine Inch Nails and Ministry and the System of a Down and Seven Dust and and if I'm not listening to that, I'm listening to like super duper cheesy stuff like The Cure, Depeche Mode, or Smithereens, or there's no in between. It's the 2 extremes.
Sure. And music's so important, I think. Are you usually listening to music when you're
I listen to
making
music
art or always?
24/7.
Yes.
I never turn it off. I mean, if I'm on a Zoom meeting, I turn it off. I sleep to it.
Mhm.
XM radio, satellite radio is the greatest invention ever. And like my brain's not happy unless it's going in the background.
Mhm.
So I'm listening to it at all times.
That's one thing about Zoom. I feel like music is missing. That's the next thing Zoom needs to work on. So
Yeah, no, it
listen
does.
to
That's why Zoom makes your mind tired. It's okay when there's only two of us, but Zoom will only pick up one voice at a time.
yes.
So we can't argue over each other because only one of our voices is going to win. And it actually irritates your mind.
Mhm.
So that's why these big Zoom meetings gives people headaches.
Yeah, I feel pretty lucky that most of the time I'm using Zoom. It's, well, not for big work meetings. Conversations with interesting people, which is what Art in the Raw is. And this is the 8th episode. So far, had photographers, painters, sculptors, musicians, DJs. We're going to have the Gold Leaf Frame Shop on here soon, mixing it up. Some of the episodes are going to have multiple disciplines of artists within the show. So I'm bringing some artists back. One of the things I've always loved is introducing people that were different that I thought would appreciate each other. So that's something I'm kind of trying to incorporate. You may hear from me in the future saying,
What? I want to ask you a question.
yeah, please do.
What is something you learned from one of your guests or a couple of your guests where you're like, didn't see that coming?
If anything, I'm finding just a very common thread between all of the guests, even if they're working in totally different mediums. A lot of the intentions are the same, or I've started looking at these parallels between different processes and being fascinated with that. And like I said, I was wanting to introduce previous guests in future episodes, and I just keep having these ideas of, oh, probably before I started recording this show, it would not have even occurred to me to introduce, for example, you to person X. It just, that connection would not have been there. And then, as you kind of picked up on, I do a fair amount of research in advance, and I've just learned all of these fascinating things. Like I now have, I could tell you about the history of ukuleles, and if you see the fountain behind me, that's a Greg Robertson piece. He was on the show earlier on, and so I had read up on the history of fountains, and I think I'm just by nature a researcher. I can't help it. So all of a sudden, I have the excuse to research things that I would not have normally just come home from work and sat down and thought, I'm researching ukuleles tonight. This has kind of served as a catalyst for that.
That's super cool.
So I'm feeling inspired. I mean, the world is crazy and weird right now, and I feel like just sharing people I feel are inspiring with other people is inspiring me. So I'm feeling good about it.
Amen to that. Share some inspiration.
Mm-hmm. That's all about.
Oh my gosh.
So thank you for making art the time to meet with me, and we got to give a little shout out to my brother Steve Kelly, who
Yeah.
introduced us. He works at Wyford, and he made it happen. So
Yeah. No, thanks to Steve. I love working with your brother. So
he's great. He's
yeah,
great.
thank you for many reasons.
Do you have any shout outs?
No, I actually think I mentioned most of them.
Cool.
I mentioned most of them, and thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I mean, it's fun to talk and share. As I said before, this stuff's all about sharing, and thank you for giving me the platform to share my views.
Absolutely. Well, I will let you get back to your family. I'm going to go have a talk with my dogs about barking during the shows. And
Hey, it's not a quarantine Zoom without a dog barking. So there you
no,
go.
no, it's what it is.
It
Um,
is what it is.
Today, let's document this, is October 7th, and the Sunday, the first episode is going to air. We're going to do one per week after that. I think Sunday is the day we're going to go for that, see how that works out. And if you enjoyed this conversation, go back, watch the other conversations, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Tim. Really appreciate your time. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You too.